Hello, viewers. I'm Vibhuti Jha. This is Jaipur Dialogue USA. And just as always, I request you to please like, subscribe, and support our channel. Give your feedback, and you know that we value your feedback. So today we wanted to talk about one of the most important global events that happens in the month of January, which is an annual feature, which is called the World Economic Forum that is held in Davos, and it attracts attention, global attention. Whether you agree with the politics of it or not doesn't matter. But the World Economic Forum does talk about issues that are remarkably relevant and almost futuristic and relevant today as well. Because as the saying goes, as a student of geopolitics, I know I was taught by IMI Geneva director that if you want something to happen 30, 40, 50 years from now, you begin to move today. You make a move on it today. And that's what is important to know, that the world is changing at such tectonic speed, brought about by a tectonic shift in technology, that we have to anticipate change. As the saying goes, you don't make your future, you don't know the future. But probably what is also true is that you make your own future. Put it lightly, if I have 5 kilograms 5 kilograms of gulab jamun or cake or cookies, guess what? My future for tomorrow is definitely known. I don't have to ask an astrologer or soothsayer or an expert. That's the importance of it. You decide your future. We decide our future. So to talk about this, I have wonderful pleasure of welcoming two very young Indians, Navroop Sahdev. Navroop Sahdev is founder of an entity called the Digital Economist. So as a student of economics myself, I love that name. Makes me feel very relevant to in today's times. So Navroopji, welcome to the show today. And the second person is Tarun Kishnani. Tarun Kishnani is a wealth manager, and he has been working with Indian companies all his life so far. And he operates from both United States and India. Welcome to the show. So, so Navroopji, I will shoot off with you first. Tell us something about the digital economists before we switch over to the World Economic Forum issues and agendas.
Sure. Maybe Vibhuti just call me Navroop, since we are in the US. Well, thank you first of all for having me. What a privilege to be connecting with you today and having this conversation. Everything you said in the introduction is something I full-heartedly agree with. The relevance and the consequential moment that Davos is in January, and not just the World Economic Forum as the Congress itself, but really the ecosystem around that is much bigger. I mentioned this because it's intricately tied to the digital economist as well. We actually launched a digital economist in Davos in 2020. And I had this interesting story where I was working on this book on the economics of emerging technologies, which another name you will appreciate because there's a lot that need to be written and done and said. And we have around 20 or so odd years of economic literature on what we call platform economics, right? So you have a central platform, and sort of the users come and create the value. But really, what is the future when it comes to tech that is transformative for the global economy? Much has to be done on that still, perhaps almost new economics. So that's just kind of the impetus for it. But we're based in Washington DC as to what is the Digital Economist group of companies, and we are a think and do tank. So the think tank side is the brain trust of the community. We do all the things a think tank does. We write, we publish, we convene. And on the do side, we're a venture studio. So we just don't stop at thinking. We actually build the platforms and the companies that we believe will change the world. So I'll pause there, but that's just a quick way to think about the digital economist.
Oh, brilliant idea. Having worked with a think tank in New York, rather remarkable think tank that I worked with, which was totally non-political. We used to do what is known as the step into step, um, the strategic trend evaluation program in relation to social, technology, economics, and politics, because each one affects the other. And we had a running joke in it that other think tanks are where thinking gets tanked. So, so having said that, it is wonderful to you have set up this entire organization, and kudos and congratulations to you for taking the initiative. Young man, it's your turn to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. So, I'd like to refer myself as a researcher, learner, student of all things that are going around, especially technology in investments. I focus a lot on research on markets between the US and India, and my emphasis is to understand where there is alpha, as any sort of asset manager would think about it. And so Navroop and I sort of met, and we sort of had a conversation. I think now this has been more than a year ago, and we spoke about how sustainable development and sustainable future, especially, is of key importance to humanity. Given that we are unboxing tools, be it within AI and now around quantum, which all need sort of ring fencing, safeguarding, and and this is the emphasis that I'm rolling with. I'm rolling with where can um, where can I get the most amount of value in technology, and what can this technology do for us as humanity.
Oh, brilliant, both of you. Thank you very much for super introduction of yourselves. And let's jump into the focus areas of this World Economic Forum agenda. And one of the things you shared with me was the business value of responsible AI. I mean, AI is a word that you can't get away with these days. My memory of AI happened to me centuries ago, if I may say so. That was when I was a sixth grader, and I used to fancy reading the comic book Magnus the Robo Fighter, where computer went crazy, and Magnus the human was fighting robo that were controlling the life. I don't know whether you have known about it or not, but I gave the copy, bought this Magnus the Robo Fighter comic from Amazon, and told my son, and he says, "Oh my God, you were advanced in your times." so, so AI has become the big thing now. We know its potential impact. We also know that AI advisor to the US government, Trump administration, has created a whole ruckus of immigration and
Yes.
technology people coming out. Responsible AI, that's a word that catches my attention. How can one be responsible where irresponsibility rules the world?
I think when irresponsibility rules the world, it's even more important to bring forth leaders who are responsible. So it emphasizes the need for technology being responsible, which in a way embodies our values and those who are the decision makers, with even greater importance than, even you kind of juxtapose it to kind of what you just said. With an irresponsible world. But I do think it's a bit of a blanket statement, and I'd sort of be careful about I guess, putting it out there as such. If you think about the basic human needs from an economic perspective, they're quite similar across the board. The challenge we have at the moment is that technology has allowed further concentration of resources and power. It has become another tool, just as, to your point. I don't really comment on warfare and those sorts of things. Of course, I have studied the political economy throughout my life and continue to. But if you think of what that gave us, the technological advancements gave us in the past, which is a comparative advantage over other societies, other communities, other tribes. That's kind of what technology is doing in the digital realm right now, and that is a scary part. And that is the where the irresponsibility comes in, because now the ones who are calling the shots are making the decisions. The second thing I want to point out is inequality in the world. I think a lot of people don't realize how very unequal the world is at the moment. Um, to give you an example, we are at pre-World War One levels of inequality in the world. A lot of people actually can't fathom or imagine how the top 0.001% of the world lives,
Hmm.
right? And I think that's kind of where the scary part, the irresponsible part comes in. I wouldn't name any names, but I think the a lot of the so-called decision makers or the billionaires in the world, they're not acting responsibly. So it's imperative that young people, folks who do care about the future of humanity as a whole, and not just how can a certain person sort of push their, I guess, agenda or notions to the world, to get together, right? Because if you convene and if you work on issues collectively, there is a viable chance to counter some of these forces that I just talked about, which is technology is a competitive advantage to and not just build, but also we used to study about this U.S. hegemony, right? And that has kind of defined and sort of underlined a lot of sort of my work and lens as well, which is kind of unique, a post-colonial lens, if you may, which, if you went to school in the US, you won't have. If you went to school in UK, they don't teach you about colonialism, so you won't have. You go to school in, Germany, that would be different. But I guess us as Indians, still have an Indian passport, right, have that lens, so we can sort of look at the world and still continue to see um, the different perspectives that are east versus west, the powers versus those who are still on the periphery of the global economy, and it's sort of combining the two is kind of where the interesting thing lies. So Vibhuti, to answer your question around kind of where I guess our flag is in the World Economic Forum is to build an inclusive world that goes beyond that narrative, and actually acts upon it, right? And I think beyond, again, the Congress Center, which were independent of the World Economic Forum, there is 16,000, 20,000 people expected on the promenade. So it is that innovation ecosystem that has a lot of interesting, innovative ideas, people, leaders, decision makers, movers of capital, movers of power in the world. That is exciting for us.
Thank you very much. And that's hold your thought, because when you talked about East and West, and you talked about the colonial mindset, I want to get back to you on it to
Sure.
continue the conversation. Tarun, you are a wealth manager. You advise companies on financial efficiency, capital efficiency, and capital effectiveness. Both need to go together. We are no longer living in the manufacturing era where efficiency was the name of the game. Today, thanks to the sophisticated computers and ways of communication, we are all coordination workers. The three different destinations, and we are on the platform, digital, same time. Think about the power of that part. So, how do you see this playing out, the AI thing, in the Indian context as we know India today? It's very important from my point of view that Sriram, who is nominated to as an advisor for AI, his story was brilliant. As 17-year Tamilian young man, he didn't have money to buy a computer, and his father spent his whole annual monthly income to buy a computer, and rest is history. He's here, and he's a mover and shaker of many platforms, not as a witness or sitting in the room, but contributing to the change. People ask, why the hell didn't he do it in India? So the question here is, how is the shape of AI in India and the massive population base in India, the talent base in India? How is India coping up with that? Or is that talent going to move to America because India has no opportunity to nurture it?
So you gave this beautiful example of the RoboCop. I just want to say that we shouldn't go back to a world which is Terminator and Skynet, because a lot of people will sort of associate with that. Essentially, having a sort of Terminator being sent back in time, so that they can change destiny. That's not going to happen for us. Definitely not. So I think the more important part here is that the current framework that we are working with on AI, I don't think has huge sort of repercussions on how India's employment story would look like. My sense is this will only augment, enhance productivity, and give the Indian youth, and especially the next generation of Indians, a chance to sort of scale and do things which are much more complicated, which you couldn't do with the current sort of Google search, right? So, just for example, right, you can use something called Gemini Deep Research, which is essentially a large language model which sort of helps you do research like a junior analyst would work. And it would answer questions, it would look through multiple websites, it would scrape that data, and it would enhance your productivity. So what that does is that it gives the youth who are currently sort of working on getting their education a set of tools that they can really go out there and enhance their learning experience with. So I see this as a big opportunity, and I am glad we've had a lot of sort of movement towards it, especially in 2016, 2017. There is an old video out there which talks about Jensen Huang, who is the CEO of Nvidia, on him being invited by Prime Minister Narendra Modi to sort of give a talk on AI to his cabinet. So I feel like we are, especially in India, we are sort of going to have our destinies tied around with the big corporations in the US, because essentially those are the ones who are innovating, and those innovations will definitely be used. A lot of Indians, given the fact that we have the size, we have the capability, and we have the actual talent to sort of work towards this. I think this is much more of an opportunity rather than something that I would see as as sort of a challenge. And to just to add to what Navroop was mentioning, I think one of the key things to watch out for is that not just AI, but along with AI, quantum, robotics, automation, AR, VR, IoT, a lot of different technologies are actually coming together. And this convergence, as we call it, is going to create a much larger sort of ecosystem, where you may have sort of bots that are walking around with us, working in our homes. And maybe a few years from now, when you and I have this conversation, maybe there would be someone who would walk in giving me a glass of water, as you know as and they would be an AI bot, or like a humanoid bot. And that's sort of the eventual goal of the current advisor, or the current chief of Department of Government Excellence, as he has been talking about, as Elon has been talking about, this humanoid experience that humans are going to be working towards.
It's not the scary factor, but what I want to say is that Magnus the Robo Fighter, or there was a movie by Will Smith, AI.
Yeah.
And if you look at it this way, that movie was made 10, 15 years ago, and the shape and size of the robo used in that movie is what we are looking at today. So the movie did predict the future and potentially what can go wrong, right? So it is all about that. And I relate it with the nuclear technology, for nuclear clean technology for power generation, which is not being done, and people are shunning it because its potential to hurt the ecosystems in the case of an accident, despite knowing the fact that France runs more, 70 to 80% of French electricity comes from nuclear power, and France has had no accidents at all. So nor has had India, for that matter. So this is what I want to say, is that the potential for risk, do we overwhelm ourselves analyzing the risk and lose out on the potential rewards of it? That's the part. Navroopji, I'm coming back to you on the East-West and the colonial part of it. You said it very well. So you are an Indian passport holder as yet, live in the thick of politics in DC. And so the point here is very important. And this is what I want to say. How would you bring about a balance? I'm not saying equal balance, and a balance between the Eastern mind and the Western mind. To give you a quick backdrop, Linda Grattan of London Business School and I were at the Economist Conference on Human Potential. And at one point in time, to summing up the whole thing, she said, it's time for the West, perhaps, to combine the Western pragmatism and innovations with Eastern wisdom. That will bring about some kind of a balance. Your take on that?
Yeah, just as a disclaimer and clarification, I do live in New York, so I'm not in the thick of the politics.
Well, you said you were in DC also. That's why.
We're based in DC, yes, and
Yeah,
I used to
you are
live
based.
there. But that's exactly why I actually moved out of DC during COVID. It's imperative because I think as a non-political, non-partisan, think and do tank, it's important to kind of get that out of the way. But I think you answered my question, the question you have for me, Vibhuti, and how we combine that and how do we strike that balance. The truth is, we are doing this every day. You are doing this every day. Tarun is doing it every day. I know for sure, and I can safely say I'm doing this every day, right? Which is also why I think this is I guess a national pride perhaps statement why Indians are so successful in an economy like US, which is focused because it really teaches you and it converts you into a professional, top talent, right, in the world. And the top of your game, whether you're on the investment side or the technology side or as an economist. And again, I recently met some of the top economists in the World Bank convenings in October, which are of Indian origin, right? And now they're U.S. citizens. But I think for the West, it is humility. It is not being dismissive of other traditions of wisdom, of history, of society, and a way to structure it, right? That is needed. And for I guess us who are born and raised in Asia, and I wouldn't just say India because it's that sort of applies across the board to Middle East and Asia being the most populated continent on the planet, and you could say that for Africa as well as Latin America, is to um, not over rely on history and just traditions and what has worked for them. The reality of the world is that 80% of the wealth and resources just move between the global north. If you look at large cross-border transactions, a very small segment of it flows from global north to global south, right? It's similar to, you have to be a warrior if somebody is coming out and attacking you. You can't say, oh, I'm a saint and I'll die here. And I think that is a bit of a dysfunction and where we lose our power as well. That, for me, thinking from a more philosophical perspective, I'm talking across generations here. I'm not talking about a moment in life where I think a lot of the power is given away. The other thing here is the emphasis on health and longevity, I think, is very important. And the formulations are different. So you have sort of the spiritual, sort of super focused on like Ayurveda and health systems and yoga, and I'm a yogi. I practice every day and meditate almost every day. Um, but at the same time, I also see a lot of the talent in India in 40s, 50s, 60s, living in urban areas who have all sorts of health issues. And I mean, you're young, right? Is what I say to that. This might sound tangential, but think about it. There's 40 years of productive life ahead, and you just threw away your power out of the window, right? And that is something we shouldn't encourage in any way. I think about our parents, or sort of our, I guess, the so-called baby boomer generation of India that doesn't have sort of the traditional lifestyle where there's a lot of like physical labor involved, but at the same time, now there's access to all sort of processed food and the traditional ways are sort of going out of the window. So I think the balance between that east and west is, again, west being respectful and cognizant of other ways to look at the world. I think if you ask me, I personally think sort of let's just call it Hindu philosophy and of the way the universe is one of the most sophisticated philosophical systems to kind of study the universe and study yourself vis-a-vis that, right? And so, but again, the Western systems, which are more focused on science, establishing cause-effect relationship, in other words, is very good at studying what's outside. So, it's, I think of this as macro meso and micro levels of studying this. And it's important we study across systems and across scales at the same time. And this is also what complexity science teaches you, networks theory teaches you. The level you study the system at would give you results that may surprise you if you study it at a different level. So what's true with you, for you as an individual may not be true in the society that you live in, and certainly not true in the sort of at the global level, right? So to be aware of this at the same time, to study this simultaneously, is kind of where I think the solution lies.
I totally understood what you said because we have yet another thing in common other than being a student of economics. I'm also a meditator for the last 40 years, and I'm still kind of a guy who wakes up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in a Brahm Muhurat. I do my meditation, yoga, and some breathing exercises.
Well, I don't wake up at 4:30, just to
Yeah.
clarify.
No, I'm saying that my habit is there. I'm part of a Gurukul system. I still wake up around that time. So it is, I'm saying this not as a bravado, my habit, my practice. So I totally get what you say. Tarunji, question to you is about the governance element. We are we often hear the West talks about rules-based society. The question is, who makes the rules, right? So in this AI governance model, like Navroop said just now, we have to bring about a balance, understanding the needs. So what I am inside need not be what is outside, the external and the internal. How do you think the rule framing will go on? Because that will eventually determine who controls. Now we know that powers that be, they manipulate things to control and manage. That's the name of the game. So how
So
will the governance thing will happen in this regard? Is there any framework today, or the framework is still being worked?
So there are two aspects to this, right? One is that to get anything big time productivity enhancement done through AI, you need energy, right? You need a large portion of energy. So we have hit two sort of ceilings. One of them is the ceiling to compute, and the other one is the ceiling of energy. So like you were talking about nuclear, another example is Japan, which has actually had sort of nuclear disasters. They've actually had to experience at the end of World War, something which no one else would ever want to experience ever. But they have sort of fired back all their nuclear plants. So it just goes to show the direction that some of these thoughts are going towards. There's a lot of emphasis being put towards fusion and fission both, in terms of the kind of technology that we're talking about is bringing small reactors, maybe fission, maybe fusion, largely fusion, and that could power up a lot of these needs of AI. So in terms of governance, I think while we build this governance model, no, the models that are out there today, the kind of AI tools that are out there today, they can be your agents. Now, what do I mean by agents? They can do tasks for you, but they cannot really replace you at this point in time. So this is where we are. So you need governance when AI becomes smarter than the average human being like myself, or most people around, right? And so at the core of it, while we're building some of these different governance models, we're also trying to sort of figure out where we can put guardrails, right? And three people have won the science award this year in the US, and all three of them have actually been researchers around AI safety and security. So a lot of them have spoken about the let AI be limited to tools and let them sort of be used by humans to enhance their work, but don't let them become agents. By that, what it means is don't let them become an extension of you. So say, for example, tomorrow you do get an agent, and you decide you want to have dinner in Manhattan. You can just tell your agent, hey, please get me a reservation for my family and me of 6 in the restaurant of your choice. and then that essentially is extending yourself into a sort of digital avatar. So will you, and this sort of boils down back to even data, right? Data and your privacy. Because when you sort of work around, you do things around the internet, you give access to all your data. Every time now you get onto a website, you either have to accept cookies, or you can reject it and the website no longer sort of functions the way you want it to function. So essentially it sort of boils down to how much you want to interact with it, where you want to go with it, and what you want to, get out of it. So while you're building all of this, we also have to see why and how and what. At the current state of affairs, if you saw where the technology is today with all that is available for public consumption, you can do a lot of tasks, be it like 20 to 30% or 35% of tasks that a desk worker or a knowledge worker does today using some of these tools. But it's not gone to 60 or 70 or 80% of the tasks, so it's still to get there. And what has happened is a lot of these, and we were talking about, Indians being so good at math and so good at chess. The finest chess player today is not a human. Of course, India holds the title with, with our young chess player who's won, but it's not him who has the highest ranking. It is an AI model which has the highest ranking. So just, these parallels are what are sort of being drawn here.
Very fascinating statement you made. The question here is again back to the governance part: is who will govern whom? Because human tendency, psychological part of it, and I want you to come in, Navroop, as well. Who will make the laws and who will control whom? That's the key issue in it. Because I'll tell you what, I'm a learner and I love to learn things which are happening. So as a banker, I know how technology has changed banking completely. When during my MBA days, I had done my paper at that time was the impact of technology in the banking in 20th century in the late 90s and 2000. That's that that long back. I had access to Bank of International Settlement document, and I wrote in my thesis that come the era of 21st century, and we may not need tall bank real estate buildings doing banking work. That was almost true. And my professor was later on retired as a Indian Institute of Management Bangalore director, Professor Ramesh Mehta. He and I got along very well. He was a Harvard guy, taught us strategy, and he said, "You must become a consultant." He told me, but we were so job driven that I joined American Express. Point is here very simple: control and manage. This particular battle royal will continue as long as humans live. There is no peace running away from that reality. So, in this rule based society, who makes the rules and who benefits most? Both of you.
I think these are excellent set of questions worthy of entire books, and much has been written on it. Thank you for sharing that story. Actually, I would say that the way you frame the questions leads you to certain types of answers and others not. Right. So if you look at the world, and this is sort of again philosophical meet Saturday morning, I can not talk about operations today, I guess, in strategy. If you look at the world and you think of it as a power play and a game of who controls whom, then that is what you will ultimately, quote unquote, manifest or build. And remember, the world that we inherited from Mother Nature is not something we built, but the artificial world of buildings, of digital technology, and all of that above, we build it ourselves. And there's an excellent book on it called Wholeness and the Implicate Order by David Bohm. So he talks about fragmented consciousness, and from that fragmented consciousness, people go on to build fragmented things in the world. So to me, when I hear this question, it underlines that fragmentation. Um, we've done a number of things. For example, I'll point out to the literature on commons, which are common pool resources, right? And almost always humans have managed their resources as commons. So Eleanor Ostrom was the first woman sociologist who won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2007 on her work on governing the commons, which is how can communities effectively manage their common pool resources that are not owned by the state and then exercised by government as an agent of the state, but instead by the community that owns it, right? And ask people, do you know a common which is right here in New York? Central Park, the first common in the U.S., Boston Common, right? So these are our shared heritage. So if you think about it, there's still a lot of tussle around managing global commons, right? Which is outer space, global oceans, water, air, right? Beyond sort of the whatever the 10 miles you get from a sovereign territory perspective. And so I think we need better governance structures that are not just replicating who will control whom type of mindset. Because for me, that is sort of medieval age thinking, and there are models to do it. So, for example, Switzerland is a direct democracy. There's no one variety of democracy, right? So we live in a capitalist society, but there are other forms of capitalism. There is social democracy that's possible, social capitalism that's possible, right? And example, Finland, Norway, Netherlands, very happy countries, right? Take care of the citizens, high longevity, low mortality rate, almost next to zero maternal mortality rate, right? Parental leave shared amongst both individuals. And so, all of this to say that better ways to do things are possible. And we shouldn't dismiss that simply because we limited the question itself.
Very, very great observation. It's all about thinking. How you think, you end up manifesting yourself. That's very important. I totally agree with that. But as a risk analyst, you need to evaluate possibilities, right? You can't ignore the realities. As my personal saying is, the more things change, the more they remain the same. The ruling class, the middle class, and the poverty class, they are just the same, operating in different time frame, in different ecosystem at the moment. Now, coming to one more topic that I wanted to talk about is, obviously, when so much is happening, where are the investment opportunities in it? And what kind of a leadership we beseech in this? The hardcore tech guy, or a spiritual meditator, Navroop Sahdev?
I think the question is for Tarun, I'm assuming.
so that sort of, I was talking to one of my friends who leads a large team of people at Bank of America, and we were talking about some of the technological trends that they're bringing in within the banking system, because that's the area that I sort of focus on a lot on. And he said, look, Tarun, this is Bank of India, right? This is not Bank of America. And I said, why? He's like, because the entire technology org is predominantly Indians, right? And you see that right from the chief information officer down to everyone who's sort of helping. And the reason why I brought this up is because this merges between the East and the West also, right? Like, a lot of people out here in the West take sort of lessons from, or sort of work around people who are hardworking Indians who scale their careers and grow to becoming C-suite executives. And so a lot of people are actually looking up to them. They're looking up to their family values. They're looking up to what they do on a day-to-day basis and try to emulate that. So I think we're all flag bearers of that. And about governance, the most important thing is that governance begins at home. And I completely sort of agree with the point where, a large portion of our society, especially Indian society, we look at our mother and our father as the key areas of governance, right? If you live in a household which is driven by your mother, then it's very matriarchal. You will sort of do things that she wants you to do, and so on and so forth. And this sort of doesn't change with technology. So it's more of the same. I feel like with more technology that is handed to me, I tend to sort of switch it off on weekends and go away into isolation a lot. So that's one of the things we do as part of governance. But the more important thing is, you said, how does one sort of work around it? I think the answer is here, right? A lot of people have sort of added to their selves cryptos, Bitcoin, Ethereum, so on and so forth, and tokens that we haven't even heard of. And the reason why people have done that is because at the core of it, unless you get hacked or stolen, those tokens remain with you and they have a value that is quoted out in the market. Essentially today, about $3.5 trillion worth of market capitalization sits in cryptocurrencies. $1.9 trillion of that sits in Bitcoin, and the market capitalization of gold, and is somewhere in the $19 trillion mark. So a tenth of gold's market cap has been sort of taken away by just Bitcoin alone. So when you have opportunities like this, I think people are looking at it and saying, hey, look, the government can take my data, they can take my privacy, they can now govern me by showing me advertisements that I don't want to see. They are probably propagating all this agenda through all these different channels, and different woke agendas are also on the rise. But what cannot be taken away from you is your cryptos, and essentially that is a hedge against extreme actions by various sort of actors, the state actors, or actors like banks, right? Because we've seen enough and more people who've come out and said what they've said to people and tried to clarify, and their bank accounts have been closed, they have been cancelled, and that has also sort of led to sort of people saying, I need to take governance into my own hands.
That's so brilliant, because as a banker, I have always warned in my statements to U.S. government that dollar is the reserve currency. United States enjoys the privilege of issuing the fiat currency, and it is a currency that is has a storage value. And if you suddenly begin to impose sanctions and asset seizures, people will resort to technology to park their assets elsewhere, because they would not want to be suddenly waking up and get cancelled or seized, assets seized. Last question of the day, last conversation, not a question, last conversation of the day I wanted to have on this element, that when I did my courses in as a learner of trying to understand the language of crypto, blockchain, and all the new sophisticated instruments which were not prevalent in my time, I realized I did 3 4 certificate courses in it, and I realized that each one talked about few issues which, until handled, will continue to be a challenge. That is transparency, liquidity, and what kind of a regulatory framework controls that. Because you do not want your assets to be blown away, and it has happened many times. So, truth, trust, liquidity, and transparency, and the legal framework. How do you think AI will shape up in all these counts? Because remember, Jungle Book, Kaa tells Mowgli, trust me. And it is very difficult to trust. Who to trust in this world? That's the big challenge people are facing on a daily basis. Navroop, you first. And I
Sure.
hope you are the next rule maker, in my opinion.
I hope we have what we call emergent governance, which is it accounts for all those who are governed, I guess. Well, thank you for that question. I've spent 8 years in the blockchain digital asset space. I actually co-authored and co-wrote the largest course on blockchain for business, Hyperledger. So around 200,000 people took that. This was in 2017. Um, but to kind of come back to a question, indeed, and the digital currencies and specifically blockchain technology, the underlying infrastructure technology was positioned as sort of this trust layer, if you may. And even back in the day, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, if you kind of hear and listen to some of my talks that are online, you'll see that I've been warning about wait until Wall Street gets in, that we run the risk. Again, I'm sort of speaking more to risk that here, that the vision would get diluted, right? Banks started to look at it. CBDCs, if you see around 80 plus banks have initiatives on it. So if traditional actors start to use that technology and sort of make it private or sort of use in their own consortia, etc., then once again it's no longer sort of this. I mean, 3 trillion is nothing, right? Like Apple's market cap is close to that, right? A single company in the current world can have that sort of market cap, right? And so the dilution has occurred, and with the sort of the frauds and all sorts of like scams that were large scale, I wouldn't go into that now. That did unfold as expected, right? It's a bit of a cycle here. There's an sort of a overstretching and then sort of pulling back. Ultimately, it filters out what's real, what's not, right? If you look at the, sort of the technological waves as it affects US and the world. But to kind of come back to your question on trust. So last year's agenda, even of the World Economic Forum, was anchored firmly on trust. The way I study trust is that it's not a commodity. It shouldn't be talked about, oh, there's no trust or there is trust. Trust is an emergent property of the system. When you do actions that are in alignment with what you stated you will do, and you do it consistently over time, that is when trust gets built. It's not a commodity to be traded. It's not a theme to be studied as a, you know, data or numbers or analytics. And I've said this at every single forum, Vibhuti, around the world, including WEF. We launched the GovTech initiative at their headquarters last year, at the World Bank, where we are global partners. And you were part of the UN General Assembly convenings, etc. At all of these places, that trust is something that is an outcome. So it's not studied as something you can buy and sell and that sort of stuff. So for me, that's what needs to happen. Let me give you an example. The climate treaty, right? The $100 billion that are supposed to be invested in the global south. I mean, where are they, right? So the treaties get signed, but actions don't follow. And of course, there is no trust. Of course, the global south does not trust the global north in stating that, oh, you cut your emissions while we developed. I'm kind of fanning that again, but it's a classic example of why there's no trust. Look at the commodities that are exported out of or the natural resources, right, out of Africa. So Africa is right now sitting at a number of materials that are needed for renewable, shift to renewable and clean energy. Lithium for battery, on and on. And then once again, if you study the terms of trade on the way Europe deals with Africa, of course, there's no trust, right? In many ways, even when politically the colonists left these countries, they kept in place the economic structures that allowed for continuation of that. London County, when we did our work on beneficial ownership transparency, we have an initiative called Tech for Transparency. I learned an incredible lot, but that is sort of the number one jurisdiction to convert, I guess, black money into white. And that carve out for just sort of London was deliberately kept from the policies for the rest of UK, right? So we blame the Cayman Islands, we blame Bahamas, etc. But the number of privacy jurisdictions in the world are US and UK, where a lot of money, $50 trillion in the hidden economy, gets sunk. Guess how much taxes we lose each year on that? 500 billion. Imagine 500 billion put to work to serve humanity. We will solve all the issues right away, right? It's a lot of money that's lost in taxes. If it's lost in taxes, it means the governments do not have capital to fund social welfare, to fund the programs that it needs. So then, the conversations around, oh, Social Security is, going to be bankrupt in a few years, so on and so forth, is because there are these loopholes that we sort of end up in these kinds of, challenges, macro challenges. So anyway, I've kind of taken everybody through a bit of a long, windy set of examples and whatnot, but I hope to clarify how one thing leads to the other, because that's really the way the world is, I think, laid out. This complexity, which comes from interdependence, different from complicated. but the interdependence where one actor leads to the other has ripple effects on other aspects of the global macroeconomy. So,
Tarun, the same question to you.
So the truth is there is no trust, right? And the reason why that is so is, and we see that especially with like countries, right? Everyone wants to invest in themselves. India is doing the Atmanirbhar program. The US is all about MAGA, right? MAGA 2.0. And China continues to sort of invest in itself. Every country wants to invest in itself. So the lesson out there for us as individuals is trust yourself, back yourself, and invest in yourself, versus trying to sort of go out there and trying to, build. I mean, of course, a large portion of this also means that we as a collective need to come together and build that trust amongst ourselves, where we say, look, this is the world we inherited. We want to leave this planet by making it a much better place. I think this is the first thing, we learned as kids when we were in school. We were like, so what are you going to do in the world outside? We're going to go help the world become a better place. And I said, I believe a lot of my classmates, my peers, all would say that. And I think one of the parts where I am playing as an individual is to sort of facilitate this dialogue, right? This dialogue and these questions sort of are pertinent, and we must ask each one of us, one another, where we should sort of lean into. By lean into, I mean, what institution can you trust? Would you trust a bank with your money? Would you trust the judiciary to give the best sort of judicial outcome? Would you trust the government to be able to sort of do what is best in your community, your people's interest? I think that is one of the key areas, and somehow this can only be done by investing in oneself.
Thank you very much. It has been a fascinating conversation for me. I learn a lot. I'm a classic learner. I never stop learning, and that's what I enjoyed this conversation with you. I see that future of India is very bright, with two warriors like who are holding up their spirituality, meditation, and yoga, including. I hope both of you succeed in the governance regulatory framework then it is created, or as it happens, because there is a need for a balance, not a balance to end the balance here that the clock stops. In the pendulum swinging, there has to be a balance. There is a rhythm that is required. You can't impose a will on one because I am America or I am India or I am China or whatever else. There has to be a balance found for what we call not compromise, but the common ground. That's what is important. What is the common ground? If you find the common ground, we have a solution. Compromise is a very unfortunate word. And my favorite example for compromise is you can't have a compromise in 2 drops of poison versus a gallon of milk. You can't do that. So this is what is important for us to realize, to draw the line. Thank you, Navroop. Thank you, Tarun. Very great to talk to you. Good luck with your World Economic Forum meetings in Davos. And hopefully I'll join you next year.
thank you.
Thank you very much. As I always end my program with the invocation of Satyameva Jayate. And for truth to triumph, you got to stand up and fight for it. Truth doesn't win on its own. You got to stand up and fight for it. Thank you very much for viewing today. Namaste.
Thank you.